Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show in freight, but there's also Running on Ice, the newsletter that could not be colder. You can subscribe to that on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. Today we welcome Alan Gassler, Zero Emissions Analyst at PLM Fleet. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
I'm excited for today because we get into kind of all things zero emission, which is, a time after my own heart as a net zero carbon girly, a little sustainability queen. We love to see that. I like to see steps that take any steps in those directions. Before we get too far into that, though, let's get some background on you and how you got started at PLM Fleet.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I have a little bit of an interesting story. So I graduated college in 2016. I have degrees in finance and economics. So I originally thought I was going to go more of the banking route, but then PLM approached me with an interesting offer of one of their management trainee programs. And I really learned everything in the cold chain and transportation industry from the ground up, from maintenance, telematics, how these units work. One of the good things is since I did have kind of that ROI economics background, it does allow me to, calculate savings and start looking long term how these customers can, save money and grow their fleets. But yeah, I've learned everything from the ground up and I've loved it ever since.
I absolutely love that. As someone who also did not go to school for the original intent to go through supply chain, I love that supply chain just finds a way. I have a degree in marketing. It said, you don't need that. You're going to come over here and do supply chain for 10 plus years, no matter how many times you try to leave. So I'm glad that it got its hands in you as well.
Thanks.
So do you mind kind of giving us a quick little breakdown on what these zero emission TRUs kind of are and how they work? Kind of give us the 411 on why it might be a better alternative than some of the diesel powered units.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with 4 different OEMs. High level, everything's supplying a battery pack. It's just how you power these battery packs. So you have one solution, which was a solar-based solution. Solar panels power that battery pack. You have another one, which is equipped with a wheel generator. So as you go down the road, inertia triggers that battery to charge it. As well as we have another provider, which has a larger battery pack, but uses a standard CCS1 charging port. And then there's also some hybrid options we have in there. We basically look to tailor whatever option works best for our customers. So it's not, one size fits all. On top of the ETRU options we offer, we also work with some of the yard tractor or yard truck companies out there. And then we also have a couple partners in regards to site solutions because that can be a big roadblock for customers getting the infrastructure going. So we have people who we can, pull on and bring in to start getting that charging infrastructure in place as well.
I like that you guys kind of have a couple different avenues. So that way, if I'm someone who primarily does a lot of domestic deliveries or things under 200 miles, my needs are going to be a little different than someone who maybe does some over the road or some of those longer haul routes that maybe hit 500-600 miles where, you're going to be out there for a day or so without necessarily, having a plug that you can just plug into your units.
Right.
So I like that there is all of that, which kind of, is it really like if someone comes to you and they say, hey, we're looking to reduce the emissions from our TRUs. We're really looking to make some impact here in our emissions. Do you guys immediately just say like, okay, here's 4 options? Or is it just take a step back and say, okay, well, what are your goals? What is your business like? And really provide that customized solution that, might comprise of a couple different of those options.
No, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. It really is taking the step back and saying, okay, what's your timeline? Do you have 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? That will dictate it as well. Can we get those ESG goals accomplished? But also upfront to ensure the success and overall adaptability of the products, we really need to understand that day-to-day operations and route info. Because like you mentioned, maybe we have to go with a unit with a bigger battery pack if you're going to be driving 500 hours. Maybe you only have, a couple hours to charge. Okay, we want to go with a higher voltage unit. All those things really need to be accounted for early on. Otherwise, you put a unit in there that, it might be successful, but you're really not getting your ROI and you're really not optimizing a lot of the value that comes with these ETRUs.
Have you had some people that maybe, I come in and I say, hey, my business right now, it's pretty local, it's pretty chill, I'll do something that doesn't need a huge battery. I can charge it at the end of a 12-hour shift. It just needs to make it through that. And have they had to kind of come back and say, okay, well, our business needs have changed. Like if maybe it's been 5 years since we put this in. Like how do those conversations go? Is it just kind of like an open dialogue of, is everything still good? Yeah, everything's still good. Or is it like, hey, our business has grown. We need to maybe look at some other options. Like, is that kind of is that ongoing for you guys? Or is that something that like kind of once you're locked in, you're more or less kind of locked into one system?
Oh no, it's 100% ongoing. I mean, a big deal we see a lot of times in regards to SOPs is, do we have the chargers installed at the right location? Is it all the way in a back alley somewhere and we're really not optimizing it? We're wasting some of that time and some of that charger efficiencies there. So we're constantly evolving when it comes to it. We had one customer who just started out, 10 trailers, so they want 10 chargers. Well, we realized over time we had the opportunity to put 5 more in there and let the units charge while they're unloading some of their diesel product. So you really keep evolving, as well as just changes in technology. Every single year, the battery chemistries are getting better. There's new products being out there. So there's definitely ways to optimize it. And to account for a lot of the higher costs on these ETRUs, you really have to start optimizing your efficiencies.
So I guess when it goes from, so I'm a carrier, right? And I say, hey, I want to take my fleet of 100 trucks and I want to start making that switch to, a zero emission or a lower emission. What does that process look like? Does it look like all of a sudden I'm switching 50 trailers at a time over, or is it just kind of like as 10 come back, they get retrofitted and then we move on? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Once we have the infrastructure in place, I personally always recommend a small rollout because you're going to have your operations as well as your dock individuals learning how to run these new units, as well as go through different charging procedures that they probably never dealt with in the past. So definitely a small rollout. Last thing you want is you put, 50 in all at once and you start having either load degradation or any temperature compliance issues occur. So you start small. We train up the teams. We like putting forth some, SOP pamphlets, some little like cheat sheets basically you can have by the TRUs and by the chargers so that anyone that's hired tomorrow can read the one pager. They'll know how to use these units. And then based upon, different timelines, whether it's internal from a customer or regulatory timelines, I like putting together kind of a roadmap saying, okay, we're going to do 10 this month, 20 next month. So we can really get a high level approach to see what time and how much time we have to replace those units and retrofit them.
I kind of like that. It's the you guys step back and say, okay, this is a realistic goal. Because obviously, someone might say, oh, we're gonna get all 100 trailers done by the end of the year. And you guys
Right.
might be like, it's a little ambitious.
Right, right.
That takes things off the road for too long of a time.
Exactly.
It could, I mean, I'm sure you could do it if you just wanted to shut down for like a month or two, but
Right.
that's not necessarily profitable.
Yeah. And also, it's a big undertaking from a financial aspect. I mean, you're shelling out a lot of upfront CapEx money that might not make a lot of sense. So if we have different ways of kind of leveraging, opportunities out there, funding opportunities that are out there in California, all over the country, it really makes that transition easier when you start segmenting it out.
Oh, I feel like that has to be a huge, especially if you have a plan in place. I'm a sucker for a good plan of like, here we go. We got a little roadmap. Here's how we're starting. We've got our infrastructure set up. So now we can start rolling. Because I feel like that infrastructure has to be the biggest component because you can't really start doing anything else until you get, the base level, like, okay, where do my trailers go when they come back at the end of the day? Like, how do we charge them up and get them ready for the next day?
Well, and everyone's doing it because it's not just one area, right? Like we like to think, oh, we live in the TRU world. It only matters about us, but you have the cars, you have the trucks, you have lawn equipment. There's so many different areas that all got grouped together in this space that I can tell you sometimes municipalities and different utilities tell me, hey, it's only take 2, 3 years before we have enough power just for a couple units, let alone a whole fleet. So that's why we always encourage have that conversation now, talk to utilities. Let's see what other options we have in there. If it's, battery storage, other ways that we can offset some of the increased, energy needs. Because it is a lot of people all going forward, the little pie that is our energy.
Yeah, and that's something that we chatted about a few weeks ago with somebody else is, what your power company might be able to physically give you. They might not want to give you the full bandwidth of that.
Right.
They might want to say, "Hey, we could give you more, but fire department says that's too much because you're gonna catch on fire."
Yeah.
And turns out the fire
Right.
department like really doesn't like people catching on fire.
Yeah.
Which is funny because they're the fire department. You would think that they're like, oh, fire, no big deal, but they're pretty like vehemently into stopping fires, which is smart because we don't need those.
No, I know, and especially with everything else going on. But yeah, it's a lot of moving pieces that until you take that step back, you really don't realize how many people it affects.
Yeah, and that's why every time I have this conversation, I always forget about all the legwork that has to happen at the beginning, which is more than just like, oh, we got to clear space for a charger or we got to
Right.
clear space for this. It's like, 2 years of permits and approvals and other stuff like that. So I feel like the transition, while we might want it to be faster, it's a little slow, but it's kind of one of those hurry up and wait kind of thing where you take a little bit to get everything done and lay the groundwork, and then all of a sudden it goes boom, 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 and you're ready to roll. Which selfishly, I mean, I like that part
Well,
when it's
so do
just
I.
boom.
I wish it can all be done in 24 hours. It'd make life a lot easier for him.
You're like, yeah, if we could get this done right away, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So when it comes from we've touched on a little bit of them, but when it comes to like, I'm looking to make this switch, I'm looking to do this, what are some challenges that like because obviously, your customers say, okay, we know we have to deal with the municipalities. We know we have to figure
Right.
out where all of this charging space is going to go. What are some of those other challenges that people are kind of surprised happen pretty regularly in this process?
It might sound a little dumb almost, but it's just plugging them in. It's no different than plugging in your iPhone every day. But when you're used to doing something, and as you know, the coal train industry has been around for forever. So people are used to doing the same thing they've done for the past 20, 30 years. So when you start throwing in some wrinkles there of charging it, making sure it's charging correctly, making sure you're looking at battery percentage before you leave the dock, because that's a big caveat now is, oh, you can't go down to the fuel island down the road. So if you load it up and you only have 30% fuel, sorry, that unit's not going out. So it's just really getting that upfront dock management and operation management. That's why when you have these discussions with different companies and customers, everyone needs to be brought in, from the guy that's loading it to the driver, because everyone needs to be on the same page. Otherwise, you start running into some of these pitfalls that really hurt the overall efficiencies of these units.
I think that's something that a lot of people kind of overlook is that you think that, okay, we're making this switch as a company, we're doing all these things, but then everybody kind of forgets to end up involving the warehouse.
Right.
Because I feel like for like a company that their whole thing is like we need to ship our products places or we have these distribution centers or whatever. I really feel like a lot of times in these decisions, everybody just casually forgets to bring in the warehouse,
Yeah.
and the warehouse is like, whoa, 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 this is not
Right.
something that we can do.
Well, and a lot of times too, a lot of companies have their warehouse or different entities almost altogether versus the actual transportation team. And we've had issues before just getting communication to make sure everyone's on the same page. And it's just a lot of changes. That's why I have a coworker, Mark Warner, who's our on-site guy, and he'll be at these locations for the first 2, 3 weeks of the rollout to be like, guys, this is how we have to do it. Let's all get together. It'll benefit everyone in the long run. But to start looking at some of those SOP changes and just making sure everything's documented clearly, because there is also a lot of turnover, as you probably know, in this industry. So if anyone new gets onboarded, all right, follow these steps. There's no real miss in your day-to-day operations then.
And I feel like that also has to be really helpful because as you are training this new staff and you are like, okay, here's an SOP that we've taken from a customer, like kind of a framework of what we've taken from a similar customer in a similar industry or with a similar type of product or operations. Inevitably, from the time that you first propose and create that SOP, you're going to have to change it probably 10 more times as you figure out everybody's working style and while this warehouse does it. And, just because I make it for client A doesn't mean that all the warehouses or everyone in that client's network is going to follow the same SOP because everybody does it differently. And that's not to say it's wrong. It's just different.
No, and you're 100% right. We have one customer. They did one location out in Stockton and they're doing another one out in California. You would think it'd be the same SOP. Nope. completely different loading procedures, different individuals. Not that's anyone's fault, but it's the little nuances that take time actually to implement that you really don't realize up front. Like you said, you think, oh, I'll just plug in the unit, write the check for the unit. But there's a lot more nuances that are actually taken into effect.
So have you kind of so as a result, you said like you have a customer that has started doing another location, and I'm sure you guys are getting a lot, especially out in California, as I think as of right now, CARB is still standing, the new California emissions regulation. And they kind of want everyone to have a lower emissions, or at least working towards it. Um, have you guys seen an increase in the want for these TRUs? And because I mean, obviously, if everyone jumps on board at the same time, you're still stuck in that like regulatory trying to get municipalities on board with it. Have you guys seen a huge increase in demand for this?
Oh, absolutely. Probably from when I first started going to ACT 3 years ago, it's probably almost 10x the increase in demand because, and it's one of the things I always say to our customers, there's going to be a limited supply of these TRUs. They're all usually newer manufacturers that require a little bit different resources to build the units. Plus, there's also the battery supply. So that's a very big contingent as well. So customers now are starting to get a little worried, like, hey, if these mandates start taking place, if I don't start making this transition tomorrow, I will not be able to follow a lot of the maps and guidelines that CARB and other legislation are putting forth. I mean, if you look at some of these bigger fleets that might have 1,000, 2,000 units, and in 3 years they need to get 10, 15% of that, well, that's a big chunk of your supply there. That's why I like telling everyone, if you are thinking about doing this, let's start having those conversations. Doesn't mean you have to do anything tomorrow, next week, next month, but let's start getting that roadmap down so we have clear-cut milestones and dates so we can know, hey, do we have to ramp something up here? Do we have to make purchases there? It really starts taking that holistic approach to ensure you can meet these timelines. But yeah, the increase has been kind of crazy, actually.
That is absolutely insane. I didn't, because I just happened to think like if I have 6 or 7 different shippers that all are, maybe in Stockton or Van Nuys or something like that,
Right.
then that's me having to go to the Van Nuys City Council or the Van Nuys Electrical Association like 6 or 7 different times, and then that's them going, hold on, hold on, hold on. Like everyone needs to stop because we need to figure out if this is even feasible to get this much electricity to somebody, which is just wild, absolutely wild.
To your point, I've heard some, stories of different companies being told, oh no, you're 4 years before we get to you guys. Like there's long queues, especially a lot of utilities out in California, because everyone's trying to do this all together because you have to factor in the electrification of the facility and then chargers on top of that. So, and everyone's going for the same thing. I mean, it gets a little worrisome, but that's why, like I said, I encourage, let's start having these conversations. Let's see what we have to work with already. Because a lot of times too, people don't realize they might have already most of that power at their facility. So they can actually transition a little bit easier too.
That's nice, especially if it's like all the power company has to do is like flick a little switch.
Right.
Then they're like, you're good, move on.
Yeah.
You don't have to sit here and wait for 700 years, which is great. But I feel like some of those significantly older facilities
Right.
are not necessarily set up the best way for that.
Yeah. Unfortunately not.
That's okay. The evolution of cold storaging warehouses is a completely different conversation for a different time.
Oh,
So, when it comes to kind of tracking and making sure that, okay, these are working, the emissions are getting lowered, obviously, that's pretty easy to see. It's pretty easy to say, oh, well, we've transitioned 10 trailers out of your 100 trailers. So, you're saving 10% emissions. But when it comes down to actually like saying, okay, this is how much you've reduced and this, like getting into the nitty gritty, how do you guys even begin to track that?
yeah. So this is kind of, I love this. This is my exciting nerd economic stuff going now. But it's pretty, simple when you just look at the overall diesel costs you're seeing throughout the country, couple that with kilowatt costs that, yeah, they've increased over the past couple of years, but you're talking about, 20 cents versus $4 per hour. So we really start looking at overall diesel versus electric utilization, and then you would factor in battery consumption there coming from the charger. But on top of that too, one of the nice things, since we do the maintenance on our units, I can actually see overall maintenance costs on these ETRUs versus the diesel counterparts. And just due to less moving parts that are required on the compressors and so forth versus the combustion engines, we've actually seen a pretty decent decrease in maintenance costs. So that's another big saving there. But another metric that is always very near and dear to customers is uptime. If you start having batteries go down, if you have units that can't cool correctly, all that great ROI saving I mentioned doesn't do too much. So I kind of take all those metrics together, build a dashboard for the customer so they can see you're saving XYZ, you're getting this return on your UT, and also, by the way, you have higher uptime.
I think that has to be nice because especially, because I'm sure you guys have the telematics inside that also show you your performance and can tell you if it has turned off or anything like that. So it not only tells you what's happening on the road while your shipment's like not being watched by anyone except a driver, which they're not sitting there going, are you still within temperature? Like they're driving. They have better things to do than sit there and babysit a temperature. But I also like that, with that, you get the performance and you can see if, okay, unit Y or unit 5 is really struggling and we already brought it in for maintenance, we've already brought it in for service, and it just keeps struggling to, hit where it needs to be. Then it kind of lets you take it back and say, okay, is this just calibrated incorrectly? Is there a bigger issue? Is a part failing, or was it just a faulty piece by a manufacturer, and deal with it that way. I like that there's all of these insights that come into not only the performance of it, but also kind of the history of it and saying like, okay, well, we're getting maybe 5 years out of this before we need to do significant changes or upgrades or other things within it. And I like that you can really say like, okay, well, compared to the unit that was on this trailer before, we would maybe get 2 or 3 years before we had to start sinking thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into repairing it to keeping it going. I like that. I selfishly like that part.
No, I appreciate that. And you bring up a very good point that people don't always consider is getting that initial buy-in. So when you're going to people who've been running the same units for 20 years, being able to show the direct comparison, like, oh, your pull down rates are the exact same. Oh, your uptime's the exact same or better. Plus, you're saving $4,000 a week. It really helps get that initial buy-in from an operations perspective that, oh, yeah, maybe these fancy new toys, a little bit different here and there. But at the end of the day, they're just boxes cooling. So
Yep.
it's all the same.
And I like that. I mean, hey, look, anything that means that you don't have to sit there and buy a bunch of diesel to run a unit and then have it break. And then now you have bought diesel for something that's broken. And
Right.
then also you have lost all of the goods that are inside of it,
Yeah.
which hopefully it's not a thing of figs or pharmaceuticals because
Right. I
those are
know.
expensive.
Believe me, I know that.
So excuse me, we are almost out of time today, but there's one more question that Alan, unfortunately, you're not going to get out of answering because everyone that has come on the show has answered this question. And it possibly might be the hardest question you've been asked all day. And that is cereal considered a soup?
So, as much as I love cereal, I don't consider it a soup. So, cereal is usually more sweet, cold, versus a soup is usually more like hearty, savory, warm. So that's why I don't consider them the exact same. Do you have a preference between the two? Give me a lobster bisque every single week. I'll always take soup over cereal.
Really, you're a diehard soup boy.
Yeah, it's cold out here on the East Coast, so I have to keep warm.
That is true. That is true. I also am not, I'm also team cereal's not a soup, but I also see cereal as like a snack more
Yeah.
than like a breakfast situation. I rarely eat cereal with milk. I just kind of eat it as like a little snicky snack. And I know that that's weird. I
No.
know that's my own cross to bear, but I also am team cereal over soup just because I literally had this disagreement with someone this weekend, and that is I'm not a big fan of soup because it feels very weird to eat a bowl of liquid with a spoon.
Hey, that's
So,
the first time I've heard that one, so I like that.
like, it's just very, like, I'm just supposed, like, you put it in front of me, I'm like, I'm just supposed to eat this liquid with a spoon. It's weird. Like, let me just eat liquid with a spoon. It's a whole thing. Anyway, If anyone has any questions on maybe where the best lobster bisque is, or if they kind of need help getting into the zero emission part of things, where can they find you outside the show?
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, Alan Gassler, as well as you can email me at agassler@plmfleet.com, or you can just go to our website, plmfleet.com. Like I said, always here for any, just want to pick my brain on something, or if you had an idea you want me to take a look at, always happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mary.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice right here on Freight Waves TV, YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcasts like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? No sweat. Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet.